This short video is going to talk about a National Geographic website that I love to use to talk about food in my language classes. The site is only available in English, but I've made some worksheets that go along with it in French and Spanish if you're a teacher there, and I will link those in the video below. The site is at nationalgeographic.com and called What the World Eats. And when you enter the site, you will see this large donut-shaped, pie graph looking at the number of calories per person up here. And those calories are sectioned off into different types of food categories. So we have sugar and fat, meat, dairy and eggs, produce. We can see that the world gets almost half of its calories from grain, and also a large percentage from sugar and fat. Not as much as it should from produce or dairy and eggs or meat. We can look at this video on the bottom to see how this has changed throughout the world. So the video goes year to year, and we can see that in 2011, there are 2,870 calories on average that people are consuming, and that about 75 years ago, people were consuming less. So that's good or bad, depending on what the situation was. If you weren't getting enough food, it's good news, but you may be overeating too, depending on where in the world you are living. So students can take this and break it down country by country. We can see all these different charts here, and the size of the donut circle is going to represent the calories. So you can see already that looking at the United States versus China here, the United States consumes many more calories than China. And we can also look at the makeup of those calories. Here we see, again, China is 64% grain, whereas in the United States, grain makes up only 21% of the diet. If you're a Spanish teacher, there are a number of Spanish-speaking countries, Cuba, for example, and it's interesting to compare these both on a timeline and also from one country to another. A good way to use this in your teaching would be to have students make a graph like this for their own consumption and estimate what percentage of their diet comes from these things, and then look at the target cultures and see how the student's diet differs from a typical diet in a target culture. For example, one that is very different is Japan in terms of meat. This also lets us really focus in on meat with some of these graphs. And we can see how much or how little people eat in terms of meat consumption, or how many calories. So for example, in Spain, the meat consumption has absolutely skyrocketed. And you could see that that would be with an increase of industrialization and the end to the dictatorship. In Somalia, by contrast, meat is less than 200 calories a day per person. So this is a very interesting resource for students to be able to play around with, and the students that I've used it with have really enjoyed being able to actually look at these graphs and manipulate them and see, for example, okay, here in Australia, sugar and fat, how much is that? Even to some extent, what type of meat are they eating? For example, I mentioned Japan before. Beef is only 1% in Japan. Seafood is 5%, whereas if we look at Uruguay or Argentina, which is known for its steak and beef, we're looking at 11%. So it would be very interesting to use this website to talk about consumption in countries around the world. You could certainly also use this in a social studies class or in a history class to see how our consumption has changed and what historical events may have affected this. I use this website as part of a project that I did for National Geographic for the Educator Certification Program. And if you're interested in finding out more about that program or more about how I use this website, in the comments down below, there will be a link and you can read the article on my blog.